In this video, we'll set up a system to add new scriptable objects, new states, and then within those states, we will add our story text. So let's jump in and get started. Let's start with some context. What are scriptable objects? Well, a scriptable object is a class that lets us store data, or data, depends where you're from, in standalone assets. It keeps mountains of data out of our scripts. That's useful in our case. We've got a lot of story. It's lightweight, it's convenient, and for us, we can use it as a template for consistency. So here's a little diagram showing that we have our code. We've got adventuregame.cs, and we want to display our story text. What will we put in there? Which words will we display to the player? Well, we have a whole bunch of scriptable objects. These are assets, and we say, let's display story data B. And then from our code, we can say, okay, well now let's let's display story data C. So we can easily pick and choose from here instead of having to have all of this content within our script, which gets pretty clunky and messy and difficult to manage. We can have them in these standalone assets, which is a lot easier. The only information that it has in them is the information that we need for our story. We don't have all the other supporting information to wade through like we have in our text, where we've got up the top the namespaces, and then we've got our syntax, and we've got our methods and class and all the different stuff in here. In our scriptable objects, it's just the data. So let's go ahead and create ourselves some scriptable objects. We are going to create a new script down in our assets directory down here. Remember, when you're creating from this area, right-click, create C# script. Make sure you don't click anywhere else or you'll accidentally make the default file name the one that is stuck. So see how it's highlighted in blue here? I can type in here. If I click away, then it will become... I'll show you how to do this actually. Then I've clicked away, and within our class is new behavior script over here. If I go and rename this to something else, then that doesn't update our class. It only updates the script name, and that causes all sorts of issues. I know I've talked about this a couple of times, but I've seen a lot of people get stuck on this. So you want to be careful. I'm going to delete that. When I create my script here, right-click, create C# script without clicking anywhere else, I will call this states. That is what we're creating here. We're creating, actually, sorry, not states. We'll call it state. Just state. Not plural, just state. Because this is the information on what a particular state is. That's what we'll be creating our scriptable objects with. Okay, so we have state, and I gave you a rule before, which was all scripts need to be attached to a game object. That's not the case with scriptable objects. We don't have to have our scriptable object script attached to a game object in the scene. That's one of the strengths of using scriptable objects. So this already is an exception to the rule that we know, but in every other instance, if we're using a script that's derived from mono behavior, and you can see in here it says mono behavior, then we need to have that attached to a game object as a component, but for our scriptable object, we don't. So let's open up state. And you can see here, it looks like any other script. We do need to make a change straight away, which is instead of deriving from mono behavior, we need to derive from scriptable object. Okay, that means that this class is going to be a scriptable object class. That's what we need to know for the moment. This now makes this a scriptable object class, and the class name is state. I'm not going to need the start and update methods, so I will delete those. As a starting point, what I'm going to do is create a variable that's of type string, and we'll call this story text. Okay, this is us starting saying we want to have some sort of area, some sort of variable where we put our story text. We'll serialize this, as we've done before. We'll serialize field, and that will make it available in the inspector. There's another important thing to allow us to access our scriptable objects or create scriptable objects from in our inspector, and that is up at the very top above where it says public class state, we need to add this line. Open square brackets, create asset menu. You can see Visual Studio knows what we're trying to do, so I'm going to hit tab to autocomplete, and then open brackets, menu name, small m, large N, capital N, equals, and then in quotations, the name of our class, or the name of this script, which is state. So you can see create asset menu, open brackets, menu name equals, quotations, state, close brackets, and then this is all encased in our square brackets. Okay, let's save that now back over into Unity. What we've just done, let me show you here, this mechanism of creating an asset menu with a name of state means that when we're over in Unity in our asset directory here, if I right click, now in our menu structure we have create, up the very top we have something called state. And if I click on that, it creates a new asset file. This is our scriptable object. We're in the process of creating a scriptable object. I'm going to call this starting state. Call this starting state, so it's very clear. We'll tidy up our naming and make sure that our story has good flow and sections and all that kind of stuff soon. But for now, we're just getting a starting state. And in my asset here, you can see this is starting state.asset. We've created this asset. I have a field, a text field over here, which is story text. And that is from our script, this serialized field string story text that we just created. Within story text, we can go ahead and write our story in here. Yes, this is amazing, but you can see a problem. We don't want to have to try to figure out what we're typing when it's scrolling across the screen like that. So there's a really neat thing we can do. Jump back over into our script. Before we create our serialized field string story text, we will add open square brackets, type in text area, capital T, capital A, open brackets, and here we can put in the size of that text area. So I'm just going to say 14,10, close square brackets. And a quick interruption, this is Rick back from the future. I want to highlight what these numbers mean and give a better description to that which I did first time around. Thank you, Gary, for pointing out that I'd made a mess of my explanation for this 1410 just here. Basically, the first number that we put after text area is going to determine the minimum size in our inspector of our field where we can write in our text. So that's the minimum is the first. And then the second number is the amount of lines before we start to scroll. And of course, I've got mine back to front, and I'm sorry, but hey, I've drawn a little character here. I'm sorry, but it should actually be reading 1014, where I want to have my text box 10 as a default. And then if I type another line, it'll go 11, 12, 13, 14, and my box will expand all the way down to there. And if I continue to type, then it will implement a scroll bar, and it won't actually continue to expand the size of my text. So it's not a huge thing. It's just something to keep our inspector nice and tidy and not to take up a huge amount of room. And 1014 is just fine. 1410 will work, but it's a little bit back to front because I made a back to front mistake. So thanks for your patience. If you want more details, I've added a link to the Unity documents for this aspect in our resources section. But for now, let's save and jump back into Unity. And now we've got this nice, huge, big text box where we can fit in all of our story. So we can write lots of things in here. You know what I'll do? I'll be even cleverer than that. I will go over to my file that I created in our last lecture. I will double click on that to open it. Copy all of my text from here, highlight, Control C, or right click and copy if you so desire. Back over into Unity, into my asset file, my scriptable object asset file I've just created in here, my .asset file. Under story text, I can go paste, and now all of that information is here in my story text. Festers everywhere are mostly with blah, 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 blah. What should I do? Excellent. So that's our starting state that the player would see. My challenge to you, there's no challenge slide, but my challenge is to get your story text into your scriptable object to make sure you've set things up so that you can right-click create and create a state and to create new scriptable objects. That way, name it as starting state and put your text in there. And in the next lecture, we will get deeper in terms of presenting that on the screen. So great work in this lecture, and I will see you very shortly.